I would say definitely I'm thankful to be with my people, bro. You know what I'm saying? Like, long year, able to connect with the bros, you feel me? Like, look around, bro. We got real unity here. So, like, Martin Luther Sanders. He's been tough, you know, and it's good. I think I grew and I learned a lot from him. I think this week we had a conversation just about things, you know what I'm saying? Just about things in general. And I feel like, you know, we grew to understand each other. You know, we share different things, you know, that we both would go through, you know. So I know he wanted this win, and I know he wants every win, but I know this one means a lot. I don't know. I wish we all, like, as a team, and I wish everybody could have got more personal, you know, within this last year.
Let's slow this down and really sit with the moment. Because if this league ever believed in accountability, this is what it would sound like. Kevin Stefanski doesn't step into this conversation as a coach defending decisions or spinning narratives. He steps in as a leader reflecting on a season that didn't unfold the way it should have. And it starts with something simple but loaded with meaning. A birthday message to Shedeur Sanders. Not a tweet. Not a throwaway line. A real acknowledgement. Stefanski opens by recognizing that birthdays in the NFL hit different, especially for young quarterbacks, because every year represents time, opportunity, and expectations moving fast. He says this one mattered because it forced him to look back honestly at how the season was handled and where leadership fell short. Stefanski speaks directly to Shedeur Sanders, not as a headline or a debate topic, but as a professional who was placed in a difficult position from the start. He acknowledges that the responsibility of developing a quarterback doesn't stop at the playbook. It includes clarity, belief, and consistency. And that consistency, by his own admission, wasn't always there. He explains that throughout the season, decisions were made with hesitation instead of conviction. And that uncertainty can quietly shape outcomes long before Sundays arrive. In this league, doubt spreads fast, and when a quarterback senses it, it impacts everything from preparation to execution. He goes on to admit that the structure around Shedeur never fully settled. Offensive direction shifted. Messaging changed week to week. And instead of allowing a young quarterback to grow within a stable framework, the environment often felt reactive rather than intentional.
Dependent on the player. You know, Bill Musgrave on our staff, he was with Matt Ryan when he was drafted, and he started right away. We all know Green Bay famously has sat their guys for a year. Mahomes sat for a year. So it's so dependent on the player and the situation, the team that you have. So those are all discussions that we would have based on where we are. But those are the type of decisions that don't get made until into the summertime. Throwing live is another piece of this. That's a small piece, but a piece of it. Getting around him, going to dinner is important. But then the whole process, then getting in and listening to the rest of the coaches, the rest of the scouts, how they see the entire draft board. But certainly Shedeur is somebody that, you know, I think has done a really nice job throughout this process.
Stefanski makes it clear this wasn't about effort or commitment from Shedeur. Those were never in question. The issue was leadership alignment. When expectations aren't clearly defined, development becomes survival instead of progress. What stands out most is how Stefanski frames accountability. He doesn't point to injuries, schedules, or external noise. He points inward. He acknowledges that as head coach of the Cleveland Browns, his responsibility was to eliminate confusion, not contribute to it. He reflects on moments where clearer support could have changed the trajectory of confidence, preparation, and rhythm. Not by guaranteeing outcomes, but by establishing trust. And trust, once shaken, is hard to rebuild. Stefanski also addresses the reality of perception in the NFL. He notes how quickly narratives form around quarterbacks, especially young ones, and how silence from leadership can unintentionally validate unfair assumptions. He admits that there were times when he should have spoken louder, not to protect an image, but to protect the player, navigating one of the toughest roles in professional sports. Quarterbacks don't just carry the ball. They carry expectations, scrutiny, and blame. And when leadership doesn't clearly stand behind them, that weight multiplies. He emphasizes that this message isn't about rewriting the past or assigning fault to individuals. It's about acknowledging that development requires alignment from the top down. Stefanski admits that he underestimated how much uncertainty can impact growth, especially for a quarterback learning on the fly. He recognizes that asking a player to lead without fully empowering him creates tension that doesn't always show up in the box score, but shows up in confidence, timing, and decision-making. As the message continues, Stefanski makes it personal but measured. He praises Shedeur's professionalism, how he prepared, how he handled adversity, how he remained composed when situations weren't ideal. Those details matter because they reframe the narrative from outcome-based judgment to process-based evaluation.
1, 2, 3.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to #1 brother today. Happy birthday to you. Blow out your candles. 3, 2, 1. Oh my gosh, you just burnt the cake even more.
Stefanski acknowledges that Shedeur handled circumstances many quarterbacks struggle with and did so without public frustration or excuses. He closes this opening reflection by circling back to leadership. He says birthdays are reminders that time in this league doesn't pause and that growth requires honesty. This acknowledgement isn't about guilt. It's about responsibility. Responsibility to recognize where leadership can improve, where clarity should have come sooner, and where belief should have been louder. And as he puts it, that starts with owning the moments where hesitation replaced confidence. This first chapter doesn't promise resolutions or future decisions. It sets a tone, calm, honest, reflective. Acknowledging that the path forward begins with telling the truth about the past, and that truth starts at the top, with Kevin Stefanski and how he handled the development of Shedeur Sanders during a season that demanded more clarity than it received. Once Stefanski moves past reflection, the conversation shifts into the football itself. And this is where things get uncomfortable but necessary. He explains that trust between a head coach and quarterback isn't built on one big moment, but on a series of small, consistent signals that add up over time. For Shedeur Sanders, those signals weren't always clear. Stefanski acknowledges that while the organization asked him to operate as a leader on the field, the structure around him didn't always reinforce that role. In the NFL, mixed messages don't just confuse players, they slow them down. He talks about how offensive identity matters, especially for a young quarterback. When the philosophy behind play calling changes week to week, it forces a quarterback to think instead of react. Stefanski admits there were stretches where the offense lacked a defined rhythm, and instead of building on what worked, adjustments came late or inconsistently. That lack of continuity made it harder for Shedeur to play freely, and freedom is where quarterbacks grow the fastest. Stefanski also acknowledges the psychological side of development, something that often gets overlooked in surface-level analysis. When a quarterback feels that every mistake could shift direction or trigger another reset, it creates hesitation. Reads get rushed, footwork tightens, timing drifts. None of that shows up cleanly in stats, but it shows up on film. He admits that too often the margin for error felt smaller than it needed to be, and that pressure didn't come from the opponent. It came from uncertainty within the system. The conversation then turns to protection and structure. Stefanski points out that no quarterback thrives when the pocket is constantly unstable. While pressure is part of the league, consistent exposure changes how a quarterback processes the game. He admits there were weeks when protection schemes didn't adequately account for defensive tendencies, forcing Shedeur to operate under stress more often than intended.
3, 2, guess what? 1. You're having a kid. What is it? Oh! This nigga got fireworks in the backyard! How you timing up that good? Oh my goodness! Nigga, film the fireworks! This is the best birthday ever! This is the best birthday ever! We got fireworks in the backyard!
When they got that new Maybach, I stayed grinding. They came for me, yeah, they lying. I ain't even hit my peak, I ain't trying. 100K.
Over time, that affects confidence and decision-making, even for quarterbacks who prepare diligently. What stands out is how Stefanski frames responsibility. He doesn't suggest that execution issues were isolated or player-specific. Instead, he emphasizes that offensive football is interconnected. Play design, protection calls, route timing, and quarterback comfort all feed off one another. When one piece wobbles, The entire structure feels it. He acknowledges that as head coach, it was his job to tighten that structure, and there were moments where that didn't happen quickly enough. He also addresses how external narratives can leak into football operations if leadership isn't careful. Stefanski admits that outside noise, debates, speculation, constant evaluation, can subtly influence decision-making if not actively blocked out. In Shedeur's case, he recognizes that instead of insulating the quarterback from that pressure, the system sometimes reflected it. That's a tough admission, but one that highlights how leadership choices shape on-field outcomes. Stefanski makes a point to clarify that none of this diminishes Shedeur's accountability as a player. Growth requires ownership on both sides, but accountability works best when it's paired with clarity. He admits that there were moments when clarity should have come sooner, about roles, expectations, and long-term direction. Without that, progress becomes fragmented. He also speaks on confidence, emphasizing that confidence in a quarterback isn't arrogance or entitlement. It's trust in preparation. Stefanski acknowledges that Shedeur consistently demonstrated preparation habits expected of a starting quarterback, and that belief should have been reflected more clearly in how the offense was structured around him. Instead, hesitation sometimes overshadowed commitment. As the segment closes, Stefanski reinforces that this part of the conversation isn't about blame. It's about understanding how development works in real time. Quarterbacks don't grow in chaos. They grow in environments where expectations are stable, coaching is aligned, and trust is visible. He admits that those conditions weren't always met, and that the offense never fully settled into a place where Shedeur could operate with full confidence. At this point in the conversation, Stefanski moves away from play design and into something even more impactful: leadership presence. He explains that quarterbacks don't just read defenses, they read the room. They feel when belief is strong, and they feel when it's conditional. Stefanski admits that one of his biggest lessons from the season was realizing how much his own communication, both public and private, influenced the environment around Shedeur Sanders. In the NFL, confidence doesn't just come from preparation. It comes from knowing where you stand. He acknowledges that there were moments when his messaging lacked firmness, not intentionally but subtly. And subtlety, he explains, can be dangerous when developing a quarterback. When answers aren't direct, uncertainty fills the gap. Stefanski admits that instead of eliminating doubt, he sometimes allowed it to linger, and that uncertainty doesn't stay contained. It spreads, from the quarterback room to the offense to the entire locker room. The discussion then turns to public perception. Stefanski recognizes how quickly narratives can take shape around quarterbacks, especially young ones. Once a storyline gains traction, it often overshadows context. He admits that instead of stepping in early to establish clarity, he allowed outside evaluation to run parallel to internal development. That's a mistake he owns. Leadership, he explains, isn't just about decisions made behind closed doors. It's about setting a clear tone that protects players from unnecessary noise. He talks about how confidence is often misunderstood. In Shedeur's case, Stefanski admits that confidence was sometimes misread as something it wasn't. He explains that confidence in a quarterback isn't bravado. It's preparation, repetition, and belief in your reads. Stefanski acknowledges that Shedeur demonstrated those traits consistently, and that leadership should have reinforced that message instead of letting it be questioned externally. Stefanski then touches on the internal challenge coaches face, balancing evaluation with support. He admits that he leaned too heavily on constant assessment, rather than establishing a firm foundation first. Development, he explains, isn't about constant measuring. It's about building trust, then refining details. When evaluation becomes louder than belief, it creates tension that players feel immediately. He also reflects on how young quarterbacks process criticism. Even when they don't respond publicly, they absorb everything. Stefanski admits that instead of shielding Shedeur from excessive scrutiny, he underestimated how silence could be interpreted. In this league, silence often sounds like doubt. And doubt, when left unaddressed, grows legs. The conversation becomes more introspective here. Stefanski acknowledges that leadership growth often comes from uncomfortable realizations. He admits that he should have been more decisive, more vocal, and more protective of the developmental process. Not by lowering standards, but by clarifying direction. Quarterbacks need to know where they stand, not just after wins, but especially after losses. He emphasizes that Shedeur handled adversity with composure. There were no public complaints, no finger-pointing, no distractions. That professionalism, Stefanski admits, deserves stronger reinforcement. Leadership isn't just about correcting mistakes. It's about recognizing resilience and reinforcing confidence when circumstances aren't ideal. As he closes this portion, Stefanski makes it clear that this reflection isn't about regret for the sake of regret. It's about learning. He says the season taught him that development stalls when belief isn't visible, and that quarterbacks can't lead effectively if they're constantly feeling evaluated instead of supported. That balance matters more than any single call or adjustment. This paragraph reinforces a key truth about the NFL. Talent alone isn't enough. Growth depends on clarity, communication, and trust. And Stefanski acknowledges that when those elements aren't aligned, even the most prepared quarterbacks are put in a tougher position than they should be. From there, Stefanski widens the lens and talks about how leadership decisions ripple through an entire locker room. He explains that players don't need speeches to know where things stand. They read actions. They notice patterns. And when direction isn't firm, uncertainty creeps into places coaches don't always expect. Stefanski admits that throughout the season, the offensive unit never fully settled into a unified rhythm, and that lack of cohesion started at the top. He acknowledges that Shedeur Sanders was asked to lead in an environment where leadership wasn't always reinforced consistently. Quarterbacks naturally become the pulse of the offense, but that role only works when the structure around them is aligned. Stefanski admits that when the organization didn't clearly establish stability, it made it harder for teammates to fully rally around one voice. Not because of doubt in Shedeur, but because uncertainty creates hesitation across the board. He explains how that hesitation shows up in subtle ways. Routes lose precision. Blocks arrive a fraction late. Communication feels rushed. None of it looks dramatic on paper, but collectively it affects execution. Stefanski admits that when clarity isn't present, players start playing cautiously instead of confidently. And confident football is the only kind that wins in this league. Stefanski also highlights Shedeur's approach within the locker room. He notes that despite the instability, Shedeur consistently took responsibility after wins and losses. He addressed teammates directly, stayed engaged in meetings, and maintained professionalism when frustration would have been understandable. Stefanski acknowledges that leadership like that should be amplified, not muted. The conversation then shifts to trust within a team. Stefanski explains that trust isn't just about believing in talent, it's about believing in direction. When players aren't sure what the long-term plan is, it becomes harder to commit fully to the moment. He admits that uncertainty at the organizational level can create a domino effect, where even experienced players start second-guessing situations that should be instinctive. He also addresses the misconception that leadership is only verbal. Stefanski explains that support has to be visible. When a quarterback's role feels fluid, teammates subconsciously adjust their own approach. That adjustment doesn't come from lack of effort. It comes from mixed signals. Stefanski admits that clearer reinforcement from the coaching staff could have stabilized that dynamic much earlier. As the reflection continues, he emphasizes that this isn't about faulting individual players. It's about recognizing how leadership alignment affects chemistry. The offense never lacked effort or preparation, but effort alone doesn't replace structure. Stefanski admits that structure was inconsistent at times, and that inconsistency made it harder for the locker room to fully coalesce around one identity. He brings the point home by stating that quarterbacks can't unify a team if their position feels unsettled. Even subtle uncertainty sends messages, whether intended or not. Stefanski acknowledges that Shedeur was placed in a position where he was expected to lead through ambiguity. And that's a tough assignment for any quarterback, regardless of experience. As this portion wraps up, Stefanski makes it clear that locker rooms reflect leadership. When alignment is strong, chemistry follows. When alignment wavers, even talented groups struggle to find rhythm. He admits that recognizing that truth has reshaped how he views his responsibilities moving forward. As Stefanski brings the conversation to a close, the tone isn't defensive or emotional, it's deliberate. He makes it clear that this moment isn't about rewriting outcomes or reframing a season after the fact. It's about understanding responsibility. In the NFL, seasons move fast, rosters change quickly, and opportunities don't wait. And when a quarterback is placed in a challenging environment, leadership has to be proactive, not reactive. Stefanski admits that this season taught him that lesson in real time. He returns to the idea of time, how birthdays mark more than age in this league. They mark progress, patience, and urgency. Every year matters, especially for quarterbacks whose careers are constantly evaluated in the public eye. Stefanski acknowledges that Shedeur Sanders navigated that reality with composure, even when circumstances were far from ideal. That professionalism, he says, deserves recognition. Stefanski emphasizes that accountability doesn't end with an apology. It continues through action, structure, and clarity moving forward. He explains that growth comes from learning where leadership can improve, where communication can be stronger, and where support must be more visible. He admits that hesitation and ambiguity have no place in quarterback development, and that lesson will shape how he approaches leadership going forward. He also addresses the broader reality of the league. Quarterbacks are often judged in isolation, while football itself is a collective effort. Stefanski reinforces that no quarterback succeeds without alignment between coaching staff, teammates, and organizational direction. When that alignment breaks down, progress stalls. Recognizing the truth, he says, is essential for building sustainable success. The message then turns back to Shedeur. Not as a symbol, but as a professional, Stefanski acknowledges the preparation, resilience, and discipline that showed up consistently regardless of results. Those traits, he explains, are the foundation of long-term success in the NFL. And while every career faces adversity, how that adversity is handled often defines what comes next. He makes it clear that this reflection isn't a closing chapter. It's a reset. Leadership, he says, requires honesty before improvement. It requires acknowledging where clarity was missing and ensuring it's present moving forward. That responsibility rests with the coaching staff first. As the conversation ends, Stefanski reiterates the core message. Accountability matters, belief must be visible, and development requires alignment. Birthdays are reminders that time doesn't slow down, but growth is always possible when lessons are taken seriously. This isn't about dwelling on what didn't work. It's about committing to what must work next. And with that, the moment lands not as a headline, but as a statement. A reminder that in the NFL, leadership is measured not just by wins and losses, but by how players are supported, developed, and empowered when the pressure is highest.